Hello and welcome to Procrastination Station. Procrastination as in procrastinating and that other thing that we all do. If you can put it together, then you're my people, and if you can't, perhaps click that next button. No shade. I'm your host, Hannah, and I'm here to talk about self-sabotage in a way that invites all parts of us to come along for the journey. I'm here to lay out the setbacks and superpowers of self-sabotage in order to manage our limitations. Throughout the show, we'll discuss designing a life that works in your favor through sustainable creative practices. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you enjoyed today's topic. Hello and welcome. I have my friend Liv here. As if you didn't know, we had an interview recently, and she's back again because we still have so much to cover in terms of being a creative and all of the things that come along with it. Today, we are specifically talking more so about creative blocks and how that comes into play with entrepreneurship and life and all of the things. So, our topic today is going to be guided by the subtopics of creative blocks. Where does creativity come from? And I believe that Liv and I have some very different but also very aligned opinions on that. So, I'm really excited for that topic. And then also just the stem, thorn, and rosebud. That's a really fun little thing that my sister taught her children in terms of just breaking down what's actually happening in their lives, what are their thorns of the day, like what are the things that they're maybe not so pleased with, and then what are the things that like their big wins, like that rosebud, that flower that they're really nurturing to grow, things like that. So to get right into it, hi, it's Editing Hannah here. I'll be jumping in a few times here and there with some side notes to either elaborate on ideas that came to me during the editing process or to translate Miss Liv. There were a few times in this episode where we were having some connection issues and the audio quality wasn't great. So I might kind of chime in afterwards just to translate. A side note to my side note, I'm wearing my editing clothes. You probably can't really see, but I'm wearing no bra and I haven't brushed my hair. This is actually the hair I woke up in, but that's fine. I'm into it and you're into it. So let's get back to our episode. This is Liv. If she would like to take a moment to reintroduce herself to just catch up any new listeners, take it away, Liv.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Super back here. Like Hannah said, my name's Liv Arcangeli, and I'm a creativity coach. I'm also a yoga and meditation teacher and a mindfulness mentor. And I'm also a dance artist on top of that.
Okay, she says dance artist. It really sounds like she says death artist, and she did not. Dance artist. She's a dancer. She does the groovy moves.
And I spend my coaching time helping creatives unlock their creative potential. So oftentimes it does look like helping people overcome creative blocks. Yeah, I just absolutely love all things creative. And so, yeah, I'm super happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. Thank you so much for making the time today. So, to jump right headfirst into our first topic of creative blocks, my question here is how do we experience creative blocks as we're creative people before we're entrepreneurs? So, just to kind of rephrase that a little bit, um, in terms of creative blocks, we are creative people, right? So we are naturally going to experience creative blocks, but we are also entrepreneurs that may be expected to experience like essentially what a 9 to 5 would bring you. So you're working 5 days a week and you're doing all of this kind of hustle bustle work, right? So being a creative person, how do you feel that your blocks come into play as an entrepreneur?
Hmm, I love this. I think myself, I've been through roller coasters of different creative blocks. As a creative, as a dance artist, I've been through blocks where I've just sort of been blocked for months and couldn't create anything on any end. I've had times where, I don't know, for example, I remember when I first launched my business, I was in an immense creative block because I was just like in place of a standstill because I had so much fear about launching my business, about what people were going to think of me, about what was going to happen. And that in turn is also a form of creative block as well. And then I guess day to day, I would just say my creative blocks look like sometimes I might feel a little bit blocked for a few days, sometimes I'll feel blocked for a few hours, and most of the time it has all to do with kind of what's going on up here. So sometimes if I, you know, I think I'd be lying if I said that, I don't always have doubts as a business owner. And I think that even extremely successful business owners still have doubts of like, oh my goodness, can I do that again? Can I help someone like that again? Can I create what I created? Can I continue to hit my income goals? Like all those things. I would say all my blocks have to do with, yeah, what's going on up here in that time. And we can talk a little bit about how I personally manage that, and how I help people manage that. But yeah, that's kind of how it looks.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I think that like there's kind of two sides to that where it's like, can I actually achieve this thing? Like that's where like sort of the root of one of those doubts. But then there's the other side too where it's like after you've achieved that thing or you're actively being a business owner, you're say you did meet your financial goals once or twice or something like that, then it's like when is this going to be taken away? Like there's kind of that intrusive thought of like yes, maybe I can get there, but then, like, will I be able to stay there and keep that momentum going or even just settle in a place where I feel somewhat comfortable or something? And honestly, for me, like, that's where a lot of my creative blocks come from is with comfort. Similarly, like, it's whatever's going on in my noggin. So, like, I have many, many creative ventures. Like, I have my business, but then I also have my podcast, and then I also have some creative projects that I keep more private. Whereas like my business is like that's for the public. I post that online and like anybody can see it, anybody can critique it. And like that's awesome. That's something I've been able to grow to do. And like little Hannah would not have been able to do all of these things. I would be so nervous. But then I also have my painting and things like that. And I find like when I'm creatively blocked, that's the first thing to go is my painting or anything that I do for myself and, like, honestly, like, sometimes it just is what it is, right? Like, we've talked about this before, like, creative blocks are natural and they're important and we should learn to love them. Those were your words. Um, but I do find, like, a lot of the time, like, how I'm feeling in my environment, like, I used to have an apartment and then now I've moved in with my grandparents and, like, when I was in my apartment, I had my space, I had my freedom, like, I was alone a lot of the time, so, like, I think I pumped out, like, 15, 20, even 30 paintings a year when I was living by myself, but then now I'm living with other people and, in, like, the past year, I think I've made 3 paintings, and, like, that's not a problem whatsoever, but it just does kind of just, like, raise some little flags in my mind of, like, that's kinda where my creativity comes from, is having that, like, processing space and that reflecting space. But
Mm.
yeah, so you were talking about, like, how you help people because I know, like, this is your zone, like, this is where you excel, so, like, I would just wanna know more, like, how you help your clients move through their creative blocks because I also imagine that you feed off that energy too, like, when your clients are not creatively blocked, neither are you. Um, maybe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, I would love if you went a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah. So first, I think it's actually important to kind of like break down a little bit what creative block is because I think that it doesn't get talked about enough because it's kind of a taboo topic. Like I remember when I was feeling creatively blocked, um, I felt like, and I was merely at this point, I wasn't like an entrepreneur yet. I was really just a dancer and a choreographer and kind of like a dance producer. And I felt very like alone at that point because yeah, no, we don't talk about it, and so that's what I want to say is that it's anyways. I feel like I'm going on a tangent. We love tangents here. I know.
We do, it's all good.
I know it's something we both we both value. So, anyways, what I to bring myself back a little bit to earth a little bit. So creative block, I always want to tell people how like such a spectrum, and kind of like I was saying that before. Sometimes it looks like you literally haven't created anything in months. Sometimes you're blocked for a few hours. Sometimes you're blocked for like a day or so, and it can look and manifest in so many different ways. So it can manifest in like sometimes you can still be creating and putting work out there, and trying to be your best self, but you're still feeling blocked. And sometimes that can look like the work you're putting out there doesn't feel like the best expression of you. It might feel really, really challenging to to create, even though you're still able to do it, it just doesn't feel like it flows, right? We all know what it feels like when something flows. It feels easy, feels like we're just kind of like almost pouring this creation from ourselves. And so I just want to mention that because I think that the first place to helping someone through a creative block is kind of understanding where they are at on the spectrum. So yeah, that's kind of the first thing I do with my clients. And some people, it's yeah, they haven't created in months. Some people they just experience an immense amount of doubt in themselves. That's kind of getting in their way from creating. There's so many different things, and each person is so unique. So it's kind of figuring that out. And then from there, we figure out kind of like where's the bottleneck? Like, what is it that is impeding you from um, establishing what is the truest expression of who you are?
Okay, I want to jump in and talk about bottlenecks real quick. I think that it's such a cool phrase, and if you're unaware what a bottleneck is, it's a narrow junction in the road that impedes traffic flow. That's how Google defines it. It makes sense when discussing finding the root of creative blocks, and I also want to mention there's another use of the term in biology. A bottleneck can be a tapering of genetic diversity that impedes an organism's ability to thrive. Something that's kind of sad to think about is that we're in one of the first human caused genetic bottlenecks in multiple different species globally. And the only time that has ever happened is, let's say, with an ice age or, the dinosaurs. Want to know how they reverse a genetic bottleneck? Well, in the case of cheetahs, inbreeding happens, which really sucks. But in other cases, scientists can introduce diversity through similar yet distant organisms that have a genetic match. As in, they introduce a species that's distant enough to have diverse genes, but it has the same number of chromosomes to be a genetic match as parents. This is why we get breeds of dogs that are mutts and typically have a better health record than the purebreds. Want to know how to shake up your creative practice when you're feeling blocked by a bottleneck? Introduce diversity in the tasks and mediums you're using to express your creativity. You normally pick up your paints to process your feelings, and right now you're just really not feeling creative, but you maybe have a lot of feelings? Why don't you try to bake or pick up some clay or something that you don't normally do that can help your brain refigure out those pathways if it's kind of missing its connection today? Perhaps your usual medium feels wrong because you're being called to express what you need to in a different way. Back to what Liv was saying.
And I kind of have like a six-part system for this, which I can actually go through, and this is sort of what I use on my clients. But the very first, I'll kind of talk about the very first part is kind of like the foundations of your well-being in general.
Yeah.
Um, and so I start this with everyone, like, what's your well being like right now? Mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, what does that look like for you? And we kind of work on figuring out and evening out things so that there isn't a huge imbalance in one place. And often that foundation gets you on a really good path to start um, through the journey of
Yeah,
kind of
yeah. Like,
block.
starting with those foundations really helps, like, build that momentum to move through, like, the rest of your system as well as move through their creative practice. That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And I think, I mean, I can share the rest of my system if you want.
Yeah, but,
Um,
like, if you're open
that'd
to
be
it, go
helpful.
ahead. Like, I don't want you to give out too much information, but, in terms of, like, your proprietary information, but if that's something that you're open to sharing, I would love to hear more.
Yeah, no, this is kind of, I always love to share. So I'll kind of go through it quickly. So like my six-part system to helping someone, I call it my six-part system to like embodied creativity. And that can mean so many different things. It can mean, you know, a system to create a flow. It can mean a system to just feeling like a creative being who feels in the flow every day. And so that first kind of part to things is sort of that first thing I mentioned, the foundation of things. What is your kind of um, life right now, like mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and kind of getting all of those things in hand. So, is it a lot of people like it's simply about getting more sleep because a lot of creatives are really exhausted, or how can we find more energy, things like that. And then the next one is sort of having a really Um, the next one is kind of having a really strong foundation and a vision on what you want, what it is that you want to create, and have a lot of clarity on that. Because if we don't have a lot of clarity on that, then it's really hard to kind of go after our goals. Then the next one is the mindset piece. This is really, really big. And it's essentially like, what is getting in the way of you creating the thing? Is it the imposter syndrome? Is it the perfectionism? Is it the not feeling good enough? What is it? And how can we address those things? The next piece is kind of what are the practices that help you feel connected as a creative? And we can talk about that, sort of like different places we can kind of gain some inspiration. But it's really about how can you feel connected in your mind, in your body, in your heart, kind of exploring in that sort of way what it is that you want to create, what's creation for you. Okay, and then my next step, this is number 5, is again like a system of creative inspiration. So this can look like, where do you go on a day-to-day basis to practice creativity, to gain ideas, and to kind of help yourself kind of open up that well of creative ideas, if you will. And then the last piece, number 6, I have the community aspect of things. And this all has to do with, like, it's the very last step because it's the most superficial, I would say. And I don't mean superficial in a bad way, but I just mean like having the accountability to go after your goals, having a support system to share your creations with, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like that was like a very Cliff Notes version. I have like a visual that I usually share with this and everything like that. But just as like, yeah, again, super quick
Yeah.
Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, no, I love Spark Notes here. I think that's super awesome. To me, it almost sounds like it's like a hierarchy of needs. Like the first thing that you focus on is your foundations. Like those are your bare basic needs as a human, but then it kind of goes up to a little bit more specific. And like if you're familiar with a hierarchy of needs, like the very first thing is going to be like emotional safety, and then the next thing is going to be like your food and housing, and then it goes all the way up this ladder up until the more superficial things like having a great job or being rich or, like whatever. Like every single aspect to that hierarchy of needs is important, but you can't get to the next rung without working through that foundational work. So like that totally makes sense.
Mm.
I like what you were saying about like it's superficial but not in a bad way. It's just like we have to work through those first things before we can get to that like a higher level of that hierarchy of creative needs.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny that you say that because used to have my system as kind of like a pyramid like that. Like you have the first one, and then once you kind of achieved this sort of like baseline of things, then you work on the next thing and the next thing. And I'm playing with it now. Again, this is kind of like my creativity coming into play, because I also see it as a like a circle, like a wheel of life, as a like a cycle of life. And I think that often like we can work on one aspect of our lives, let that chill and simmer for a little bit, and then work on another aspect of things. I think we talked about in our last episode, like it's really important to kind of like work on one or two things, so that you're able to kind of implement that thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just to say I love that you say this hierarchy, and I also think that like there's space to think about it in so many ways that we can't even understand. Like, if
Absolutely,
that
and
makes
it's
sense.
almost like a trickle down effect too, where like you start with these foundational things, like as you said, like where your blocks may be coming from, or like what the actual problem is, and as you become aware of the more beginning steps, it starts to trickle down to the later phases. Like some people, I imagine, like in terms of their creative blocks, like the main thing is within their foundations. But then once they get their foundations, they're like off to the races. They have their vision, they have their mindset. Um, of course, you have to like move through those things to make sure, but it is a trickle down effect so that you can have like a
Yeah.
different perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, hopefully what I shared is so far is valuable. I've never shared that in a podcast scenario, and I usually have like a visual that I like to show people.
You know
Uh,
what? I think like well, obviously because it's like a podcast, there's not as much opportunity for visuals, but what you said made a ton of sense. And
okay.
maybe for a visual learner, that visual is like an added bonus, but I think it was super valuable.
Okay. Okay, cool. Well, then let's continue then.
Yes, let's carry on. So we
Mhm.
were just talking about like the hierarchy of needs, and we were talking about like how there's so many different ways that we can look at our needs as creatives and stuff like that. So before we move on to our next topic, I just want to make sure that we've covered all the bases in terms of how we experience creative blocks. I really love what you were sharing about how you work through creative blocks with your clients. Do you find that the same system works for you when you're experiencing a creative block?
Yes. And to be honest, if you want like a quick and dirty way, I don't even want to call it that, but like yeah, like a quick and dirty way to kind of unblock your creativity, just go to that very first step that I mentioned. And that's really just like how can you nourish yourself, your mind, your body, your soul. A lot of the times that looks like, are you getting enough exercise? Are you getting enough sleep? Do you have enough fun going on in your life? Like,
Yeah.
are you seeing friends and valuing those relationships? Those types of things. Because I think that like we always neglect one area of those things because life is busy. And so that's kind of an easy place to start. So for me personally, especially because I've sort of been through the whole sort of ringer of things. And because I do personally have creative practices that keep all of these things going, I seem to be pretty good in general. It's just when I do feel a creative block, I'll like take one of my, for example, creative inspiration processes, or I'll go back to my like basic needs and I'll just like double down on that.
Mhm.
Yeah, to answer your question.
No, totally. I would say that I do similar. Like there's for me like when it comes to my creativity, there's two ends to my spectrum. One is like contraction and then the other is expansion. So in terms of working through my own foundations, like either I need to be retractive with my energy and I need to process and I need to reflect and all of these things that are very internal, and then there's the expansion side where sometimes I need to get out and actually like talk to somebody else and hear somebody else's problem to put my own into perspective so that I don't feel like there's like a mountain on my shoulders because, we're all a little bit self-centered in our own narratives, right? So stepping outside of myself and expanding into talking with friends or meeting a stranger or any of these things, like it helps me put my own problems on the back burner, and then when I'm not thinking about things is when I'll get, like, a new idea or some type of new inspiration. I thought that actually when you were talking about your six-step system, you were talking about inspiration and, like, where people go to find their inspiration and stuff like that, and I also think this moves us pretty easily into our next topic of, where creativity comes from. Like, for me at least, like my inspiration doesn't necessarily come from a specific place, but more so from like a specific energy. Like when I'm moving between that contraction and that expansion, and when I'm nurturing myself, when I'm not keeping up with my productivity. I saw your post recently about productivity and how like being too productive makes your mind on like a one track train, and then you can't actually take in any external information to be able to come up with new ideas. Like for me, it's always about finding space to just like not be on a schedule or not be on someone else's schedule. Like these are all things that can really help my brain like come up with new ideas. And I swear to God, I come up with new inspirations on a regular basis. Like every single day I have new ideas. Currently, my problem is not necessarily in coming up with new ideas, but it's actually on executing those ideas. Sometimes I can have so friggin' many ideas that it's hard to prioritize and be like, which is actually going to be the idea that's going to help me right now, or which is going to be the idea that's going to move my business forward or move my creative skills forward or anything like that. So like I'm kind of rambling about myself here, but in terms of inspiration, like I find that finding inspiration is not necessarily as difficult for me as it is to actually take action on it and to see value in that inspiration, be like that, yeah, that actually is a good idea. It's not a lack of idea, it's a matter of believing in them too.
Mhm.
Um and like of course that moves through your whole system. Like there's foundational things that go on with that too, with believing in my own ideas, let's say. But yeah, like that's just kind of a tangent, but I just wanted to sort of talk about that a little bit. In terms of where does creativity come from, how do we nurture ourselves as creatives to maintain inspiration enough to follow a creative career? Because we're not just creatives doing the creative thing on a regular basis, we're actually actively trying to make money from that and to teach other people that. Like, how does nurturing ourselves really maintain that inspiration?
Mhm. Well, I feel like there's like a million questions within everything you just said, which is great. I love that. I love open-ended kind of questions. But the first kind of thing I'll speak to in terms of like the where creativity comes from, and this is something that's really important, is as creatives constantly making an effort to be in a rest and digest state. A lot of us, because we're sort of so busy living our everyday lives, and this is kind of where all the productivity stuff comes in. This like fight or flight state all the time. When you're in this fight or flight state all the time, you're in mode have any space to be creative. You have space to survive and kind of do. Whereas when you're in your rest and digest, this is when your mind, your body is in a place of stillness and you're a lot more open and receptive to creative ideas. You can think about this by like um, have you ever had creative ideas come in a time where like you seriously least expect it? Like you're like
Oh, yeah.
out for a walk or you're hanging out with someone or you took a couple days off and you all of a sudden feel this like extreme inspiration to create or you're in the shower, you know, so many things, right? So it's important to actually make time for those things. And sometimes it doesn't have to be a lot of time. You can just say, okay, I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes to really tap into this like rest and digest place where I can be in stillness and let that happen. So to answer your question, like creativity comes from stillness. Creativity comes from um, the sort of deepest impulse that we have within us to create, and we cannot find that impulse unless we really slow down um, and listen deeply. So that's kind of like the first place is like, do you have that place for you to slow down and listen? And then when you do have that, you are one, you have way more creativity at your disposal. Two, you're better, you're more rested to actually be able to, this is the second piece of things, right? First it's inspiration and then it's execution on the creative thing. So one, you have that inspiration, and two, you're well rested so you can execute on that thing. Because when we're not, we can't show up the same. We can't show up as creative as we want to be. Once you're in this more like creative, receptive state, you can even think about the execution as just like a big, long creative process where you're changing things and trying things and constantly sort of like reworking things as a creative mind would do, right? Because things don't always work out the very first time. You're a problem solver as a creative. That's what you do, you know? Um, so to speak to that, once you're able to kind of tap into this state, then it opens up a lot for execution and inspiration.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like in terms of like following a creative career path, that is really in the execution side of things where it's like I know as a creative I have enough inspiration that I can consistently execute and that I will never run out of ideas. Something that I repeat to myself a lot is um creatives are reinventors. So we take things that have already existed in time and we maybe add a new element that's completely unrelated and we reinvent this existing idea into an absolutely new concept by creating some type of an alchemy between two things that already existed. We take some canvas, we take some paints, we make something brand spanking new. Reinvention is such a massive concept to me that I actually want to elaborate more. I believe reinvention is more specifically the cornerstone of business creativity. When it comes to recreational creation, which funny enough is spelled recreational, like reinvention, when you're creating things for the sake of it, it's a journey to discover the soul. Now I'm curious, what is a soul? I imagine our lives are like a story where you're the protagonist and your environment is both your antagonist and your reward. The soul is both the narrator and the author to the story, and sometimes when your story is a drama or a tragedy, your narrator can go rogue, and creation is like taking your narrator to boot camp. So, in my world, creativity comes from reinvention, be it to reinvent the status quo with your business when you're feeling stagnant or to reinvent your rogue narrator. Anyway, back to the episode. So, in terms of where creativity comes from, how do you feel about the actual source? Like, where is the source of creativity, either within us or does it come externally? Like, what does that look like?
I think that this is such an interesting conversation, and I think we are talking about something that cannot be seen or felt.
That's
Because
my
if
favorite thing.
it's my favorite thing, it is. Creativity is energy, you
Yeah.
know, and we again, like we can't see it, and I can't fully describe it. It's like how do you describe like that energy that you have every single day when you like wake up and then you have this idea and you're like, well, I'm gonna go do this. I'm gonna go for a walk and then I'm gonna make this for breakfast and then I'm gonna wear this. It's like how do you explain the base of that? And for me, like that's when I think that it's really beautiful to think of creativity as so much more than just like creating a piece of art or creating a business or creating a post for social media, because creation can really be anything. Creation could be me like reaching into my fridge and like grabbing this water. Creation can be what I was saying before, deciding what outfit I'm going to wear today. Creation can be picking up this pen and doing a couple scribbles. Do you know what I mean? Like it kind of this is a bit of a tangent as well. I'm just
No, it's
realizing
all good.
too. But
It can be literally anything.
yeah, another sort of way, and this is kind of on this tangent as well. So I teach yoga and I do a lot of yoga, and we do a lot of like deep breathing, breath work.
Mhm.
And in yoga, we call breath work pranayam, also known as your life force energy. And to me, I think that's creativity. I think creativity is our life force energy. That sort of energy that runs in through us. So that being said, that's kind of another way to access it is, you know, deep breathing. As you breathe, every breath you take, like it's a new moment of creation.
Absolutely, absolutely. I really love that perspective. In my perspective, creativity, it's really a balance between like boredom and disruption of routine. So for me, like creativity a lot of the time can be like, let's say for example, like something as simple as drinking water. Like, I suck at drinking water. I don't drink enough. I'm terrible at it. And for me, like, in order to access my creativity, like, how can I actually drink more water? I look at my receptacle. Do I not like my water bottle? Let's get a new one and see if maybe the mouth feels different. And then I got one recently. It has this like little like my boyfriend gave it to me actually. It has this little like push top. And suddenly, like I'm drinking way more water because I like the feeling and it's like a fun little game for me. And like that's just like so simple and basic. Like your doctor would tell you like, "Ah, drink more water." And I'm like, "Okay, but how? Like how do I actually drink more water?" So like it can be these really mundane things that you want to maybe solve in your life where you can access your creativity and like at least for me, I really struggle with boredom. I've got a really quick brain, so if I'm bored, I'm like it feels like I'm dying. So, honestly, I was talking to my sister about this the other day, like, the kids that are growing up today, they don't have the opportunity to experience boredom. That's a whole other conversation about where we're going as humans, but in terms of, like, boredom, like, when we were kids, we did experience boredom, I'm absolutely positive we did, but we didn't experience boredom for long because we just had to find something to do. We had to figure it out, and a lot of the time as adults, it's the same thing, like, I hate my job, and you can tell yourself, "I hate my job, I hate my job, I hate my job," and then one day you have this, like, miraculous idea to start a business, and that was born from your boredom. So you can have a daily routine, you can have things that like are just sort of habits that you do. And then if you want to actually change those or if you want to make an impact in your life, you have to come to a point where that boredom is like too much to bear or too much to handle. I actually a random idea, maybe with these kids that are always on screens and stuff like that, as they grow older and they do have to experience boredom sometimes, maybe their creativity will be like that because it takes a lot less time for them to feel boredom because they've experienced all of that stimulation growing up. Maybe it doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing that they don't experience boredom the way that we did. Um, but yeah, I think that's super duper
Mm.
interesting because we really are quantifying something that is not quantifiable, and I think it can be quantified, but it's quantified by the individual. Somebody else who's a creative may say that they don't struggle with boredom, and it has nothing to do with their creativity. But for me, it highly does.
Mhm. I love so much of what you just said. Um, yes, we do need to be bored. I think we need to be bored to be creative, and that's also like if you feel creatively blocked, then like, okay, create that boredom, because I find that we are always something new, like that is creative, emerges when something ends, and
Mhm.
then we're at this place of boredom, and we're at this place where we're chilling on that boredom before something happens. And I think that this is really important. So, like, if you're waiting for your next big business idea, let's say you're someone and you're like, oh, I hate my job and I really want to start my business. Like, I really want to start my own business, but I don't know what it's going to be about. How do I get there? Like, I don't know any of the things. All I know is that I want my own business. Let it chill for a while. Let your idea simmer. It will come as long as you're continuing to nurture yourself. Sit in that boredom. It will be uncomfortable. It might suck. It might take longer than you want it to, but it's so important to sit in that. And then this is when creativity kind of is, that's why I almost like to think of creativity as magic as well, right? Because you can really listen inward, and then you're just kind of like, it's like your subconscious is like, okay, just kind of chill on it. Like, just to kind of bring this point across, I'll kind of share when I first started to create my business. So I was that very person who was like, I want to create a business because I don't want to work for anyone else. And but I don't know what my business is going to be about. And so I remember that for a long time I was like, what is my thing? Like, what am I really good at? And I honestly just like chilled. I would meditate and I would journal. And I kind of like listened to my intuition deeply. And what it told me was like, Liv, just chill.
Yeah.
Just chill. Just let it simmer. Just be, have fun, live your life, whatever. And then, boom, like a strike comes. And ever since that moment, that strike of inspiration, I have an unwavering inner knowing that this is exactly what I'm meant to do.
Yeah.
And I mean, it comes differently for everyone, but just to say that like creativity can just like not be there. And even though it feels like it's not there, it is there. It's just telling you to chill out for a while. And
Yeah.
then, if you're nurturing yourself properly, it kind of just happens. So,
Absolutely. There's that's really interesting actually. I have a couple things to say on what you just shared. First of all, like you are such a creative person. Like to me, I see that through and through, and it's just really interesting that you were like a dance artist and like a choreographer and like all of these things, and you're like, what am I good at? Like obviously it's creativity, and it's really funny that like the external people in your world may even be able to see something for you that you need to take more time to really process and feel into. And I think like to me, you being a creativity coach makes so much sense, but to you, you were probably thinking like, can I actually do that? Like that's such a new industry, like coaching, like that was not even a real popular industry to be in like even 10 years ago. So now like can I actually do that, right? Like there's these different agreements that we have with ourselves that we have to really work through and sit through like And honestly, like, sometimes it doesn't even necessarily take that much work, like, it's just a matter of, like, planting that seed in your head, like, "Maybe I could be a business owner," to let that idea eventually flow to you. Another thing I wanna mention too, like, at least for me and my creativity, like, let's say like, with my own business, like, if I have something that I really wanna figure out, like, I created a course recently, I was asking myself at the time, like, "How do I make my workload less? How can I make a substantial income to the point where it's, replacing a full-time income? I don't wanna work for anyone else either. How can I do that without grinding myself into the ground?" And that was create a course, pre-record something so that I can help more people and spend less time doing it. And like in order to arrive at that idea for myself, and honestly arriving to any idea, the thing that I need to do is just ask. They say that you're only crazy if you actually answer yourself. It's not crazy to talk to yourself, it's crazy to respond. For me, it's a matter of, like, just asking and waiting because that answer will come. I will answer myself. Maybe I am a little crazy, I don't care. I will answer myself eventually, and it's a matter of just opening up that mind space to just be able to have that pathway to think about it, to be able to dream on it a little bit. And it's just a matter of, like, just asking, and, like, for myself, I really like to do that in the shower. You mentioned that a little earlier in this episode that, like, sometimes, like, your place to go for your creativity is really in the shower, and the reason I say that is because there's such a symbolism of flow when you're in there. I like to sit in the shower and, like, I'll have my hands kind of, like, draped behind me, like, kind of pointed towards the drain, and I'll just let the water hit my back, flow down my body, flow down the drain, and it's like you're getting hit with this water and then you're being washed away of all of your inhibitions, let's say, and then it washes down the drain to be able to let go and free yourself from anything that you may be holding on to, and like just like really sitting and feeling those feelings and allowing my brain to go whichever direction it needs to is where, at least for me, my creativity really comes from. That's like the place where it comes from. And more on where creativity comes from, creativity is the unknown variable, the chaotic component, the element of surprise. Cultivating creativity is accumulating little surprises into inspiration. Creativity comes into our narrative from an external spark. It lights up our memory banks, our pain vaults, our pleasure centers, which creates an internal energy that needs to tell a story through creation. Creation is in repeating or learning from history. It's in cataloging, organizing, healing, meditation. The exact routine you follow precisely the same way every time you take a shower. And creation is in that time that you chose to take the long way home instead. Maybe you saw some cool animals on the way. That's creating new experiences for yourself to then build on your experience in the future in your creations. To answer the question, where does creativity come from? Well, it comes from you, and it comes from me, and it comes from absolutely nothing. When I'm feeling in a creative rut, the first thing I do is break my routine and rebuild. The more often you are creative, the more creativity you'll cultivate. Now back to Liv.
I think like I love this conversation. I think like for the listeners as a takeaway, um, I think it's a really important question to ask yourself. Like, what is my personal relationship with creativity? Because it's going to be different. Like what you think creation is going to be different than me or what Hannah thinks.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just important to develop that inner working conversation with yourself. You know, when you establish, okay, what does being creative mean to me? Then you can kind of answer the question, okay, so now that I know this answer, how do I tap into this creativity every single day? What nurturing practices can I have so that I can be with creativity? And then that way I can call on my creativity when it feels like I actually need it.
Yeah, for sure. Like understanding your process behind creativity. And as you said, just to reiterate, like it is going to be different for everybody. And that's the point. If we all had the same creativity, then it's not creativity. It is meant to be different for everybody. And like at least for me, like sometimes I just ask that question and like yes, the response comes from my own head, but it feels like it's from an external place. It feels like it's a download from source energy from the universe, from whatever you want to call it. And it's just really like important to me to be able to understand that part of myself, and I find it just so freaking interesting to take it a step further and understand how that happens for other people as well, and, like, just, like, learning from each other is I find so valuable to be able to, like, really dive into this because as you said, this really is something that is not quantifiable by anybody, but I really wanna try. Because I feel like so many people can benefit from creativity. It brings a peace of mind, it brings self-confidence, it brings art, culture, technology to our society. It is just so fundamentally important to us as human beings to be creative every single day. Well, I said every day, but it doesn't even have to be every day. It could be small. Like I was waiting for this call to start, and 10 minutes before our meeting, I was just painting now. I have this little frog beside me that I'm painting a mushroom crown on his head. Finding these little spaces within your day to just do something that maybe doesn't have value towards your job, but has value towards your heart is just so foundationally important. Um, yes. I don't even think that was what I wanted to say, but that's what I said anyway.
Oh my gosh. The problem with our conversations is that you said like 10 different things. Like there's just a million tangents. We could have this could be going all day.
I
Like
know, we could have, like, a 4-hour podcast, I swear to God.
yeah, we could. There's a lot of things I could have said. I do really like what you said, and like I honestly think that creativity is a very like spiritual thing. And I sometimes like I don't like to use that word because I think we all have a different sort of relationship to spirituality. But I think even if you've never thought of yourself as like a spiritual person, spirituality can really mean anything you want it to.
Oh, for sure.
And as you're doing a painting, like that's an act that can be your act of spirituality, you know. Um, and so I love the conversation we were having because that's sort of my like step four in terms of creative inspiration is like, um, because spirituality is creativity, like, how do you like develop this working relationship, this conversation, with creativity?
Yeah, for sure. I also really like I see it as a very spiritual practice too, and from listening to you, it seems like you also do too. I really love that within your own creative practice, within your creative business, I love that you don't focus on the spirituality side of things because I do feel like I absolutely agree. People have different relationships with spirituality. I'm a highly spiritual person, but if you told me I would be this spiritual like 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't believe you. Um, and creativity has helped me find that, and it does look absolutely different for everybody, but for me, it's just a matter of, like, finding things within myself that helps me connect more with the external world and helps me understand the external world better, and, um, I think that's really, really valuable because it just ultimately makes things a lot more palatable for other people. You're not talking about spirituality, you're talking about creativity. And you're kind of secretly also embedding those spirituality practices within it to be able to make that palatable for the absolute masses, right? So I just think that I think that that's really beautiful. I think that that's really awesome. Um, I want to segue now into the last little section here, and maybe we've covered it throughout this episode, but I'd like a summary regardless. What is our stem, thorn, and rosebud within creativity as ourselves, the individuals who are running creative businesses? So that means what's actually happening right now, what's setting us back, and what's our biggest win of the moment.
Hmm. I love this practice. I actually do this like yeah, it's like rose, bud, thorn, or something like that. Same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I do this after I teach yoga classes to kind of like assess how it went and like improve
Yeah.
next time.
I love it too.
So
Like we've talked about like neurodivergence a little bit too. I feel like sometimes when your brain moves so quickly, it can be hard to really notice just like the little things. Like what is actually happening right now? I need to process that and like like, it can be difficult without having a tool or a framework like this to be able to have that perspective of like, yeah, maybe something's going wrong, but there's also this huge win that's happened. I find ADHD people love to bypass their success and just move to the next thing. So I feel it's so important to just like break it down. Like, what is happening? What do I like and what do I not like about it? But yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So in my life right now, what is my like rose bud thorn, basically?
Rose, stem, and thorn. So like, what's
Rose stem.
happening? What's the vibe? And then what's the win? And what's the loss of the moment?
So right now in my business, I feel like I'm in a new cycle of things. I had a lot of things happen in my life. I just finished 300 hours of a yoga teacher training, so now I'm like
Ooh,
designated 500 hour plus. I have more than 500 hours, but it's like a I don't know, it's like a designation as a yoga
yeah,
teacher. So I just finished that, which took up so much of my time. And I also moved, and I also sort of changed my business name to sort of reflect more of what my business encompasses. So in my mind, I'm on a new journey, um, in a way, in my business, which feels really exciting and
that
like a
is
new
so exciting.
creative kind of journey. Even though it's not like new, like I'm still all the systems I use are the same. Like it's not like I have similar clients as I kind of always have, all the things, but it feels like new opportunity to grow and create connections. So
It sounds like reinvention to me, where
yeah,
it's
a new cycle.
yeah, I think that that's really exciting. So, from that circumstance, what would you feel is holding you back to your full potential?
Yeah. I think I would say as an entrepreneur right now, I think what I'm struggling with the most is consistency.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think consistency in the tasks I don't like. I love being an entrepreneur. Like
Mhm.
I love it. It has on so many different levels. I could talk about that for so long, but there are some things I truly do not like.
Oh, of course.
um, so things in terms of like I don't know, like accounting and logistics and um, just like day to day daily operational things that are like not creative and not fun. I'm right now procrastinating on those things, especially with summer, because I'm a human and I'm like, I want to spend time outside. I just moved
Yeah,
to the beach. I want to be by the beach. So,
no,
yeah.
I'm in the absolute same boat. What would your biggest win be?
Oh, I mean, I think currently my biggest win is finishing my 300 hours of
Yeah.
teacher training and finding a way to take the value that I learned into my clients. Another one I want to share is one of my clients that I worked with a while ago. She was feeling like really creatively blocked and hadn't created in a really long time when we started working together. And this week she has an art opening for a whole bunch of work that she has created. And so for me, that's a huge win, to kind of see that come into fruition. Like just I feel like a very proud coach, and it's very surreal to see that sort of like creation, because we did creation together. We talked about creative process and everything, and that sort of like translated to something she's putting out into the world now. So every time I see that happen with clients, that's a win for me.
I love that so much. That's really, really exciting, and especially to be able to have a hand in that, like, that's just really awesome because I imagine, like, how many people she's going to be able to touch with her creative ability as well. It's like a compounding effect from the people that you touch with your creative ability, and I just think that's really, really beautiful. I love that so much. And I also wanna mention too, you were talking about consistency being your setback at the moment, and I just maybe want to challenge that a little bit and say, like, you did just move and you did just finish some major
Yeah,
certifications within your own business. And sometimes we're not consistent on things because they don't really matter that much.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's okay to lose out on some consistency. And I
And
find
yeah,
too where I feel like, why can't I actually follow my routine? Like that's something that I love my routine. I love building routines, but I don't love following routines. I love to break them, and I can get hard on myself sometimes for not being consistent. Then I have to ask myself, am I not consistent on this or am I procrastinating this because like I don't know, I'm nervous, or is it because it actually doesn't necessarily matter that much? Like, there is just kinda a balance with that, so I hope that you give yourself grace when it comes to your consistency.
Absolutely, and I love how you say this because I went through this sort of internal dialogue with myself yesterday, and I said, you know what? It's a beautiful day. I'm going to go to the beach and just chill. And so I did. I dropped my whole to do list and I did that. And so, which has been needed because I've been super busy and everything. So,
Yeah.
yes, 100%. That is all in the works too. Sometimes it's just a timing thing too, right? I would love to know what are your stem, rose, thorn?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. So my stem. So what's happening with me right now is um so many things. I'm hopefully planning to move at some point. So that's like I'm at the very beginning stages. So that's like planning out where and how and all of these things. So like um that's something that I'm really looking forward to, but it's also very daunting. So I know obviously I know you understand how daunting it can be to move. But what's happening right now is ultimately I'm taking a look at my own creative process. I'm taking a look at my business, of my momentum and my growth, and like I'm really loving how I'm seeing growth happen on YouTube and on my podcast. I think that that's so flippin' exciting. But then I also can get a little bit frustrated from time to time in terms of the growth of my business side of things, where like where's these freaking clients at? That's kind of the always always struggle of being an entrepreneur is how can I get more clients? I would say that is actually probably my thorn at the moment because the client thing will be able to fund the move thing. But in terms of my biggest win at the moment, it would probably also be like doing the YouTube things as well as picking up my paintbrushes for the first time in a while. That's been something that I've been putting on the back burner, but then as I've been painting more and I've also been listening to more music, like as I'm tapping more into my creative outlets, I'm noticing how friggin' important it is to be able to fund my business creative side of things. Like it really like pushes the creativity on the other aspect of my like my career, right? So like I'm kind of rambling because this is a hard question. This is why I wanted to ask this question because it's really hard to take that inventory, but I think it's important to do so. Like it's just like challenging to put into words when you're a creative person. Like this whole chat we've been talking about creativity and how it's an unquantifiable thing. Try being a creative for your career. It can be unquantifiable sometimes. Another win that I can share as well would be that uh I'm relishing in my rest guilt free. I just like I've always known you can't be rested if you're feeling guilty while you're resting, but my body has not necessarily agreed with that. So that's something that I've been more successful in as of late is when I know that I need rest, when I can read the signs in my body, I actually just listen to them and do it. And there's no like, oh, but like there's this other thing on my list and whatever. And like I just care so much less about my list and more about how I'm doing. And that's like the biggest win. Like that's probably like the top tier win. Um
Yes. That
yeah,
is a that is 100% a top tier win. I think that is a really hard place for us to get to. So,
absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for that so much. And I do want to just sort of wrap this up because
yeah,
we actually might get cut off in like less than a minute. So I don't know if you
do you wanna, like, hop off and then we can do a proper conclusion? Because
yes,
I feel like
actually
it'll be too rushed if not.
that would
Okay.
be great. I don't want to rush either. One
Yeah,
second. Thank you for this, by the way.
absolutely. Okay, I'll see you in a sec.
I'm chiming in here one last time to say, first of all, thank you for watching. And second of all, Liv asks me one of the most enticing questions I've been asked in a while, at least on this show. And I didn't answer exactly how I would have wanted to. She asks me how I know she's a creative from a branding standpoint. I gave her some walk through the park with me while I processed this thought, but really what I was thinking is how exactly do I know someone is a creative? A creative sells their creations by telling the story their work presents, and many creatives live this story that they're selling. That's the branding piece. Now, a creative sells their creations by telling the story their work presents to their customer, and many creatives live the story that they're selling. Products are brands, and brands are typically so much more than just a product. They are a lifestyle. I suppose that living this creative entrepreneurial lifestyle is quantified by the authenticity and alignment between the art and the artist. Who really knows though, because this is sending me on a mind tangent about the conjunctions of alignment being internal and authenticity being external. I might have to make an episode about that. Who knows? Anyway, the tables have turned on me to fathom the unquantifiable, and while giving myself the second chance to respond the way that I'd like to, I would like to add Liv is so sensitive and adept to reading emotional context in our conversations. It's like when I tell her a story, she knows exactly how I felt about that story by the cues in my inflection, rather than for me to have to break it down for her step by step how I felt. Now, if you know me one on one, I don't really like to talk about my feelings in a step by step how I felt sort of way. So, being my colleague slash friend slash semi frequent podcast guest, this works for me. Not only is she keen to sense these subtle shifts in my language, she's quick to adapt to accommodate our environment. Now, this side note is getting really long. If you haven't noticed, we've had some technical issues throughout this episode. On YouTube, it's a lot more noticeable than it is on the audio version. There's a couple times where our audio cuts in and out. That's fine. There's a couple times where the picture frame changes, where we're doing the interview and it's like this solo interview thing. And also, that is fine. And honestly, if I were with anyone but Liv, I'd be frustrated and worried about our ability to tell a story when the cover is shaggy. But like true creatives, we kept our sights fixed on doing our best and focusing on the value, because the meat of the story is more important than the package. Liv doesn't do anything to prove that she's a creative. She just is. Anyway, let's wrap up our episode. So just to kind of get us back into the energy, we were just talking about the wins and everything. We were like honestly moving on to our conclusion anyway. Um so like those are super big wins that I was sharing, and I really would love to invite any listeners on this episode to really think about it for themselves. Like, what is happening for you right now objectively? No need to have too much emotion attached to the objectiveness of what's happening for you right now. But then what is the thorn and what is the rosebud? What's the thing you can celebrate, and what's the thing that is holding you back, potentially causing an emotional charge towards your circumstance. Please think about that for yourselves. And I invite you, Liv, and also myself, to think about that on a regular basis, to just really stop and pause and just look at your surroundings and be able to take that inventory of what's going on for you. I also believe that a self inventory for creative is just so highly important, to be able to just take stock of your life and to take stock of yourself, to be able to understand where you can grow and where you're succeeding and all of these things. If Liv has anything to add before we take off today, I would love to give her space to do so. Yeah. Did you have anything else to add?
Just to sort of reiterate, something that's jumping out at me from what we talked about earlier is just like, what's your relationship to creativity, and really see if you can mull over that for yourself. Because if you don't know the answer to that, then it's really hard to call on your creativity when you want to. It's kind of like we have to practice accessing it. You know, you can't just go ahead and like be good at something all of a sudden. You have to actually practice and be with that. And you can think of creativity as working on a relationship. It's like friendship. If you put no effort into a friendship, if you never text your friend, if you never make an effort to hang out, that friendship is really going to dwindle, right? But
Yeah.
if you actively nourish that friendship, and you tell your friend that you're always supporting them, and you make an effort to hang out, like you're nurturing that relationship. So that's just kind of a way you can look at your creativity for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And just kind of to tack on another idea that's jumping out at me is in terms of like my own relationship with creativity, a lot of what helps me is developing my routine around it. So there's certain people that if I want to more creativity into my life, there's certain people that I need to limit my access to, where it's not that I don't love them, but there's sometimes like certain conversations that might be heavy on my heart, where that's not where I want to be if I'm calling in more creativity. Or let's say it's also in like taking showers, like making sure that if I want to be creative today, that I take my shower in the morning. And when I take my shower, I'm actually sitting there and processing the things that need to be processed in order to be more creative. Nurturing that relationship with creativity to be able to be more creative, right? Yeah, I really love the things that you've shared throughout this episode. I want to thank you again for making the time to be here and for just sharing all of your wisdoms with anybody who takes the time to listen to this episode. Also, thank you so much to anybody who does take the time to listen to this episode. Thank you for being with us and thank you for being you.
But yeah, this was a good conversation. Yeah, it was very lovely. So thanks. I appreciate you having me,
Yeah, thank you as
and
well.
giving me the space to chat and stuff.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your perspectives and like I truly mean that. Like I find talking to you, I get so many ideas and um I hope that's mutual. I hope you also get
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally like resonate with what you were saying. You're like, I help with like the creation of things and you help with like the selling. And I love that because then they kind of
it
go.
is like it's like the same but it's so different. And
Mhm.
I just think that's really powerful. I feel like we could have some mirroring in our careers. Like
Absolutely. Yeah. I had a question for you. Just out of curiosity, because earlier in the podcast you said that you were like, oh, like I think you're like a creative person, like through and through. Like I see that, and I'm so curious. Like, I'm just kind of so curious how like you personally see that because just from like a branding perspective and like a perspective from like how people see my like account and things like that, I'm just kind of curious to know your perspective on that and like what you see because maybe that would
yeah,
help me kind of like illuminate that in a branding way more. Do you know what I
yeah.
mean?
No, I absolutely know what you mean and I would love to answer that question. It's also very tricky to answer because for me it boils down to energy. Um
Mm,
and like there is so many different energies that you can have as a creative like but for you specifically like I it's really in the way that you speak, honestly, like the way that you have some enthusiasm when you're speaking to ideas that you're working through or specifically like on your live streams like or when you're speaking to me like you just have like this light in your eyes. We're like, yeah, oh my god, and like it's like I can see those gears turning in your head where you're like, this is making me feel inspired, so I need to like either dig in on like that question that like to learn more so that I can have that creativity or like um with the way that you also like expand on your tangents to be able to like uh just kind of cover the different angles. It kind of shows to me that you have the brain to be able to like have that encompassing perspective of like multi-dimensionalness. Like
mm,
there's a lot of very 2D thinkers where like everything is very binary and their structure and everything like that. And I really hope this is received the right way, but
no, it is. Yeah.
it comes down to like the structure of the way that you speak, at least in my perspective. Um,
Cool.
because it is, I can definitely see like there's a flow in the way that you speak rather than a binary. Um, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it does, and it helps a lot. Thanks. It's just nice to know, like, yeah, just kind of see what you see, and like it helps me like illuminate my strengths, and yeah, thank you. I
Yeah, no
appreciate that.
worries. Like, I can tell you're a creative even without knowing that you're in dance or that you're a coach or anything like that. Like it's an energy for me, like maybe like kind of a bit of an aura kind of thing.
I love that.
And it's also like there's other more superficial things as well, like the way like your fashion sense can also be construed as very creative as well. And I think that I just think it's lovely. I think you're a lovely gal and like creativity is great and I love connecting with creatives. So um
Well,
yeah,
same to you. I feel like, yeah, you're a very creative person too. I meant to say, I really love that analogy with the water that you were
yeah,
talking about. I've heard that in ways like of like that's like a really good thing to do after like client calls to sort of like rid yourself of like that energy. But I never thought about doing that just because like you're so right, just like creativity being like water, and I feel like I tap into that in so many ways, but I never thought of doing that in like this physical water. So I thought that was really, really cool, like kind of your
yeah.
perspective on that.
I feel like
Yeah.
anytime I've spoken to like creativity coach or like energy workers or anything, like it's always about like imagine the light like rushing over your body and then flowing through to the ground for that
Mm.
grounding aspect. Like to me, like running down the drain is that grounding aspect. Whereas like being hit with the water, that's
Totally.
calling in that source energy of those ideas, but then not having too much attachment to them as well while they're also flowing. And then
Yeah.
by the time I step out of the shower, whatever's remaining is what I need to be taking action towards.
Love that. I
It's
love
gold.
that.
It's golden. This has just been really great. I love having you on my show. I love working with you, and I really hope that we get the chance to do so again in the future. And another little heads up, if anybody has not yet seen our first episode together, I'll link that in the description. Make sure that you go check that out. It was also really great. Not that I'm biased or anything, but it was awesome. And if you would like to keep in touch with Miss Liv here, you can find her on Instagram. She has actually changed her handle since our last episode. It's at Liv, Liv Creative Wellness. So that's Liv as in her name, Creative Wellness. So go check her out on Instagram and, consider working with either one of us, depending on where you are with your creative journey. I help entrepreneurs sell their creative practices in terms of digital marketing, and then Liv helps creatives unblock themselves and move through their creativity. So the way that I see it, Liv helps them develop that creative product and that creative ability within them, and then I help them sell that product. So we really can collaborate in so many different ways in the terms of the way that we do business and the way that we help others. So uh just thanks again everybody for taking part in my journey as well as in Liv's journey. I really appreciate all of the support.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, Hannah. I always love chatting with you, and I could literally continue this conversation for so long. There's so many tangents I could go on, but yeah, thanks to the listeners for watching. Feel free to say hi on Instagram. Also, if you have any questions for either of us, I think both of our DMs are open. So if there's anything that strikes your curiosity and what we talked about today, definitely feel free to reach out to either one of us. But
Yeah,
yeah,
feedback is key. Like, I really love to know anything if you found something that particularly landed for you, or maybe something really didn't land and you disagree. I just really want to know. Maybe we can talk about it. I love learning. So if there's anything that any listeners have to add, I would really, really love to hear it. And I know Liv is in the same boat. So that wraps up our episode for today. And I will catch you guys in my conclusion. Thank you so much for being here with me, and if you enjoyed today's topic, now is a great moment to subscribe. If you have any feedback about today's topic, please reach out to my social channels. I help creative entrepreneurs market their creations in a way that feels authentic. I have a self-study marketing program that covers basic and advanced marketing concepts with 9 modules and activity sheets. I also sell content creation templates to help you manage your social media with unlimited content creation ideas. And I also offer one-on-one marketing consulting services. Check out my socials and my website to learn more. If you're interested in working with me, please reach out via email. So that's social media if you're reaching out for my podcast, and email if you're reaching out for business. All relevant contact links are in the description, and thanks again for listening. Cheers for now. That was pretty good.